been looking forward to this all weekend. A professor has launched the country's first anti-woke degree. Eric Kauffmann has started the course at the University of Buckingham. And it comes after he left Birkbeck, University of London, after 2 decades of service, citing political differences. Well, I'm delighted to say Professor Eric Kauffmann now joins me in the studio. Fantastic. Long overdue. So, a lot of people will be like saying, an anti-woke degree, what's that about and why was it even necessary?
Well, I mean, anti-woke degree might be stretching it, but what I will say is I've got a course which is open to the public. It's an online course which people can sign up for on woke. And I just said, well, this is an ideology like communism, fascism, any other ideology. Let's study it openly and, objectively. That's not happening in universities. So this is one thing I'm doing at the University of Buckingham. But also I want to do a master's degree program, as you say, which will be something that allows people to write dissertations and explore some of these topics which really aren't touched on in most universities in any detail. And
one thing that gave me a particular hope when I read this story over the weekend was the fact the course was born out of the fact that you guys are saying something I've been saying for a long time, and that is within academia, white men are now particularly prejudiced against.
Well, right, because you touched on two things, race and gender, right? White men, that sort of puts them in the crosshairs of both of those. And it's so in academia, I mean, what we call woke is really making sacred historically marginalized race, gender, sexual minority groups. And so these are the sacred groups. If you offend such groups in any way, therefore you're subject to some kind of cancellation or restriction. And what that means is whole areas of research. So white working class boys, for example, aren't really being done. And measures to improve their lot are also deeply out of fashion. If it comes to a race gap, a gender gap, that can only be explained by discrimination, never by anything else. That's an example of the distortion of academia that's taken place as a result of this ideology.
And yet, when I started writing about this 8, 9, 10 years ago, the data has been there for 20 straight years, Eric, and yet it's irrelevant. It doesn't fit in with the mindset that if you're born white and you're born a man, you've won life's great lottery.
Right. Well, yeah, there are these ingrained ideological slants within the professoriate. For example, there have been a lot of papers published on bias against women in academia. Only one of about 10 papers finds bias against women. More find bias against men, most find no bias. The one that finds bias against women is cited out of all proportion to any of the others. So that kind of tells you that people see what they want to see and neglect what they want to neglect.
And what was fascinating is that Professor James Toody, the Vice-Chancellor, who's also behind this, was saying he felt that Margaret Thatcher would have been at his shoulder on this because the battle for free speech and diversity of thought on campuses is withering away. Eric, how many people on campuses these days, in terms of the staff, the tutors, the lecturers, the professors, how many are conservative?
Extremely few. So, for example, right now in the social sciences in this country, it's about 9 left to 1 on the right. That's up from about 3 to 1 in the mid-'60s. So it's always leaned left, but it's now really left. And at the top universities, it's even more extreme. Harvard, it's now 82 to 1 left to right. That just gives you an example of how much of a monoculture we've got and how little diversity of thought.
And does that help explain things that we talk about every single day on this channel? And that is, it seems that the young people coming out of our academic institutions have this political orthodoxy and monoculture because they're all being taught by academics who agree with each other.
Well, exactly. I mean, they're getting it from the schools, first of all, but the second thing is there's a 6 to 1 left to right split amongst students, right? So there's a big left overrepresentation, but the left now is more intolerant. So not only that, but the left is more intolerant than it was 20 years ago. So you've got that cocktail of left wing plus intolerant left wing, and that's what's giving us cancel culture.
And a lot of people say, oh, it's just students, they're just being young, they're just being silly, they'll grow out of it. But the thing is, of course, Eric, these people are going on to work in public bodies and they'll be running the country.
That's right. And surveys we have asking the same questions from 20 years ago find much more tolerant attitudes to free speech. The reality is you've got this illiberal progressive generation, although I don't want to generalize too much, particularly it's more female than male, entering workforces, leading to the kinds of workplace revolts that we've seen in places like the New York Times, for example. And that's changing corporations and organizations, pushing them away from merit towards DEI and various other kinds of ideological positions.
And yet we see oftentimes conservative societies in mainstream universities being cancelled, having their speakers deplatformed. And so there is an extreme intolerance from the liberal left, the woke left on campus.
Because it's a moralization of questions that people differ on, right? So you're not just wrong, you're evil if you're conservative. And this is the problem, is we've moved into a position. There was a survey I saw of white American liberals who, they were asked, somebody who disagrees with me is immoral. Do you agree with that statement? It was almost half of those people who agreed. And so we've got this problem of the moralization of political debate.
And so it becomes a battle of good and evil rather than facts and fiction. Where does your course come in then? What are you hoping to get out of it? Who's going to sign up for it? How can people get involved?
Well, if you go to my Twitter, it's at EPK8. UFM, and then the pinned tweet will take you to the course. It's online. You don't have to enroll for a degree or be assessed or anything. And what this does is it really takes this belief system and says this is not just being a good person, being nice, and whatever else you're told. This is an ideology, and it has a history, and it's got certain social groups that support it. We need to understand that and treat it like any other ideology.
And finally, we're seeing a hell of a lot of problems on British streets about Palestine at the moment. Right. That's one of the strands, is it not, that seems to become an orthodoxy on campus. Therefore, it's coming onto our streets. Student activists are so vociferous in their belief that Israel is bad and Palestine is good.
Well, it's a totalizing worldview. You've got oppressor and oppressed, and that's racialized into white and non-white. The Jews are put in the white category, the Palestinians in the non-white category as the colonized. And it's through that lens that they're looking at this conflict. And so it's very absolute, very totalizing and moralizing. Again, not a way to have a debate.
So therefore, Eric, racism against Jewish people is okay because they're white?
Essentially, yes. They're white, they're settlers, they're colonizers, they're imperialists, and therefore they are, all gloves are off when it comes to dealing with them. It's that sort of, and of course what you can see is the flip side of this, we're so nice to the downtrodden, is in fact we're going to dehumanize the oppressor. And so that dehumanization, which we've seen it to some degree with whites and males, we're also seeing now being applied to Jews.
Excellent stuff. Eric Kauffmann. So people, Buckingham University, people can go online and enroll, get stuck in. Thank you very much. Yeah, and you brought a bit of common sense to the channel. Make sure you get GBNews on your course. I'd like to come and do a lecture or two.
You should.
Thank you very much. Now,